and welcome to the next session in your Extensions Program New Teacher Support Series. Today we are going to talk about reevaluation and eligibility. First, we are going to start with reevaluation. Every student with an IEP is due for reevaluation every 3 years. This is when we reconsider eligibility for special education related services. When you're performing reevaluation, you are able to find out if a student is due by going to Student Information and selecting the tab that says Eligibility. First, we are going to go to EC Process tab, and then we are going to go down to where it says Reevaluation. When you click on Reevaluation, you are going to see the following tabs: Assessment Summary, Review of Existing Data, Assessment Review, Reevaluation Decision, and Create Draft/Final Reevaluation Report. During the course of the reevaluation process, the team is going to determine if they need to request additional formal evaluations in order to determine eligibility, or if they can just move forward with existing assessments. Let's start with the assessment summary. Now, on our example here, the assessment summary is blank, but what you'll normally see in the assessment summary is some different examples of formal evaluations and informal evaluations that have taken place regarding the student. I'm going to give you some hypothetical examples. So if you were to add assessments, it's going to bring you to this page right here. Here you get to select the assessment type, the assessment area, the subject area, and add any additional comments. In this hypothetical, I have selected an educational evaluation, specifically the Brigance. And here, on the side where it says comments, I would put any information about the student's evaluation. This goes for any evaluations that are done on a student. Typically, this is a whole team process where your speech pathologists are going to be updating their formal evaluations, your occupational therapists are going to be updating and uploading their formal evaluations, as well as your psychologists and your other related service areas. So let's say that they are getting physical therapy or hearing services or visual services. Each individual who's responsible for these different evaluations is going to be responsible for uploading those evaluations. But it is your job as the case manager to make sure they're all there, right? Because everyone can make a mistake. You might upload it into the ECATS documents, but forget to add it into the assessments. That's why you're a team. And the paperwork can't move forward unless all the pieces are there. And that's part of your obligation as that case manager. Once you have finished those assessments and all of them are in place, you are going to move forward to that record review. And under the record review, you're going to see information under each individual tab. So what I like to make sure people are aware of is that every tab here needs to be filled out in order to move forward. You have to do the record review, summary, observational data, additional observation data, and additional information. You have to click through all of these and make some sort of selection in order to move forward. And you want to be able to add relevant information here. So information about attendance, information about past and current grades, work samples. This is a compilation of information that you are using for the student's reevaluation. And like I said, you're going to want to click through each and every one of these. Make sure that if you have any information from the parent or outside evaluations, you put it here under this tab. Classroom-based assessment, this would maybe be some classroom educational data, or possibly maybe you have some, I don't know, iReady information. Any data is important to include on this reevaluation report. Here's where you'll put that observational data. And this one says any additional data. You can actually select on the bottom here. If you don't have any additional data, you can just click the little button on the bottom that will gray out this area, and then you won't have to put any information here. Same thing with the additional information. If you click that no data is available for this area, you just click that and it will disappear. But you can probably find some information to put in this little narrative section for additional information. This is kind of like a catch-all for everything. Next, you go to the reevaluation decision tab. This is a really important tab. They're all important, but this is a really important tab to talk about. So this is when you decide as an IEP team if you determine that no additional formal evaluations are needed, or the team decides that formal evaluations are needed. If you select the team has determined that no additional formal evaluations are needed, what you're saying is the team has conducted a review of existing data. The team has determined that existing data is current and relevant. Existing data will be used to determine continued eligibility for special education related services. This does happen sometimes. Sometimes the formal evaluations that you have in place are more than reasonable for making a relevant determination for special education and related services, in which case you do not need to ask for any additional testing. But if the team does decide that they need to ask for formal evaluations, you are going to click that second button and it's going to populate more responses for you. So in this case, you're determining that formal evaluations are needed. And this can be for a variety of reasons. It could be that it's been a while since formal evaluations have been done and it's time to do them. For example, some students qualify for special education related services with play-based assessments. And when students are in third grade, these play-based assessments might not be a good representation of their current abilities. So it's important to look at the evaluations that you have and ask yourself if they're a good representation of the student now and what they need. So, if you do decide that formal evaluations are needed, you want to make sure that you are responding to the following questions as accurately as you can, right? You don't have to say yes to all these. You don't have to say no to all these. These are really based on why you're asking for these formal evaluations. And I'm going to give you some examples as we go through. The first question statement is if the student continues to have the existing disability. So if a student already has an established disability, one of the 14 qualifying categories, and your team has reason to believe that the existing disability does not um, take place any longer, no longer exists, then you would select yes to this. If you're not questioning whether that disability exists for that student, you would say no here. The next one says if the student has a different disability area suspected. So this would be, for example, if the student is currently categorized as DD and they're looking for a school age category from DD to a different suspected area. Well, then that student, you would click yes for this option because you're looking for a change in category. You would also click this, for example, if a student has previously qualified for special education and related services under, let's say, LD. And then we have reason to believe, maybe through some outside evaluations, or for some reason, some development has been made, and the student has autism. We still need to establish a school age eligibility for autism. We can take outside evaluations, but we also need to conduct our own evaluations and we need to establish its impact on the educational environment. So we do formal evaluations to create or establish that eligibility for a category change. The last one says if the student continues to need special education or related services. If it is in question, that the student continues to need special education related services, or if they are due for reevaluation, like we're coming up on that 3 years, you're going to select yes to this because that is why we are conducting these formal evaluations. Here's what that means in practice. If a student has already qualified for special education and related services, and we are looking to exit them from speech or exit them from OT, or even exit them from extensions or lower the amount of support that we're giving them in the special education environment, whatever it may be, if we're looking to make that determination, then we're considering this a yes. Like we are looking to see if the student still qualifies, still needs special education or related services. The next section is programming. So the important thing to note is that if you say yes to any of the previous options, you do need to perform an eligibility process, which we'll be talking about next. You do need to do eligibility. If you only do a programming change, you don't need to do an eligibility. Now, if you do programming and you do eligibility, you still need to do eligibility. So that being said, you would not need to necessarily do an eligibility determination if you are just doing one of these areas. If a student is on reevaluation, so you're doing reevaluation, it's that every 3 years, you need to be doing that eligibility documentation that we're going to be talking about next. But a program change can be a variety of things. So the first one says present levels of academic achievement and functional performance. Let's say that you are just asking for some observations or you are asking for a new educational because it's just been a while since they have done an educational and you want to see where they are with that, how they're currently doing. That would be something where you might say, yes, yes, we're asking for formal evaluations to make a change to present levels of academic achievement and functional performance. The next one says whether any additions or modifications to special education related services are needed to meet measurable annual goals and participation in general curriculum. This would be, again, a programming change. You in just the development of the IEP. So one example of this would be if you're asking for APE evaluations. Let's say the student is coming of age to participate in PE, but you have a suspicion that they need access to adapted physical education. That would be removing them from participating, not necessarily removing from general education peers, but it means that they would be getting adapted curriculum for PE. That also means that they might have goals for APE, right? If you're just doing an APE evaluation, then you can click yes for this one because you're making a change. And you would also want to click yes for present levels of academic achievement and functional performance because you would be creating present levels based on that APE eval. Here are some options for screenings and evaluations that you might need in order to establish eligibility. So let's say we're doing a school age category change. They currently qualify under DD, and we're looking for a school age category change. You want to select specific evaluations based on the school age category that you suspect. And you can suspect, I mean, as many as you like. I usually like to say 3 is a good rule of thumb just in order to make a best practice determination on eligibility, right? So you're not really just going into it considering one area, you want to consider multiple areas. How do I know which evaluations to ask for? We have CMS eligibility checklists that you can actually find linked in this presentation. And these are going to give you different eligibility checklists. So the evaluations that you ask for AU are going to be different for the evaluations that you ask to consider eligibility for deaf blindness, developmental delay, a mild intellectual disability, so ID, versus maybe a learning disability or speech only services, like those sorts of things. So those are different categories of eligibility, and we have them all linked here for you to know what exactly the formal evaluations that you need to make that determination. And it's going to look like this. And these are great documents to have to keep track of when the different evaluations are completed. That can really help. But it's also going to tell you which required screenings and evaluations are needed. So if you're considering AU as one of the categories, you want to make sure that you are selecting the appropriate assessments. So that includes adaptive behavior evaluation. You want to ask for always, do you see where it says health screening for everything? Where's that health screening? Oh, it's alphabetical. Health screening, and then you're going to say at the bottom, it's going to let you check the hearing and vision because you always want to ask for hearing and vision assessments for anything to make sure that you're getting an accurate representation of what they're able to do. Because if there are any hearing or vision concerns, it can impact the performance on the assessments themselves. So you want to do that adaptive behavior, you want to do that health screening, you want to do the educational, you want to do a psychological evaluation, you want to do a sensory processing evaluation, social developmental history. You also want to do the behavior assessment related to autism. And then any additional assessments that you would like to do on top of that. Let's say that the student is having some pretty significant behaviors. The team can decide that they want to do an FBA or functional behavioral assessment, which can lead to establishing a BIP for the student. If you are also concerned with their need for OT, a motor screening, a motor evaluation, if they need speech language services, you want to do at least that speech screening, but it's probably going to lead to that speech evaluation. So those are some things that you might select if you are considering a category of autism. And this can change based on the category. If you're considering a category of orthopedic impairment, you would definitely need to select that medical evaluation. So, like I said, it depends. That's why we have the checklist for you that you can go and make sure that you have all the assessments that you need. Some important things to note here is, like I said, if you select health screening, it's going to want you to give a specification. So we always like to say health screening, hearing screening, and vision screening. Those are essential. And then I always like to check a review of medical history and records. That allows you to consider any outside evaluations that the parents might have. So if they bring in an outside diagnosis of autism, that lets you review that medical history and records, and you can submit that for consideration too. And then when I do a psychological, I like to ask for that psychological evaluation. And if they're being considered for a TBI, make sure you're getting all the other evaluations too, but you would actually specifically select psychological evaluation for TBI. But you want to go ahead and click that psychological evaluation, including cognitive and social emotional measures. That's going to give you that those components, and then the psychological evaluations, including intellectual evaluation, just so you have all the evaluations you need. And then you're going to go ahead and select the meeting date. The purpose of the meeting is going to auto-populate to that reevaluation report, and you're going to fill out all the information about the meeting participants. So you finalize that document, right? If the team decided to do formal evaluations, you're going to move forward to consent for evaluations. So you finalize that report. So let's say that you guys decided to do formal evaluation. So you're going to go to EC process, and then you're going to select consent. That is going to bring you down here to consent to evaluate. You're going to create consent to evaluate, make sure all of these are filled out appropriately, and then you're going to draft and finalize that. You need the parents to sign this document, which is going to give consent for the team to do those formal evaluations. It has to be signed and then uploaded here under the consent for evaluation / reevaluation data. You have to get that signed and returned before you conduct any evaluations, including that hearing and screening. You have to get this finished first. And then you move on to, there's going to be a little gap here. So if you decide on formal evaluations within 90 days, you need to have finished all of those evaluations and plan as a team to meet for the eligibility determination. And you're going to be making that determination based on the formal evaluations. Let's say that you guys decide that you do not need formal evaluations. You're just going to do a review of existing data. Then you're going to move on right away to that eligibility determination. But you're going to be making that determination based on a review of already existing data and formal evaluations. So in order to continue with eligibility, you're going to go to the EC Process tab, and you're going to select eligibility, which is going to bring you to that eligibility determination page. And you're going to see all the different components listed. Starting off, you're going to see the meeting purpose and suspected disability. Under student information, you're going to see the specific student information. Just verify that all of that is correct. This is the time to catch any errors in spelling, like this is it. And if you do see any errors here in the student information, you are going to want to submit that change to your data manager to have that fixed in the system. This is when I have caught some real errors, like student spelling of the name or like an incorrect language. Like this is a good spot to just say, okay, check this with the parents. You have them in the meeting, right? And first thing first, you're going to select meeting purpose. You're either going to select initial eligibility if this is their first IEP and you are doing that initial. That's also what you'll select if you're doing an out-of-state transfer. And this is the eligibility meeting following that out-of-state transfer. So this is their first IEP with us. If they are just due for reevaluation, that every 3 years sort of thing, you're going to select reevaluation. Reevaluation is what you'll select if you have done formal evaluations or if you have not done formal evaluations and you're just doing a review of existing data. So either way, that's going to be a reevaluation. After you select the reevaluation, you're going to select the current suspected disability. So let's say that the student already has a category of AU. You're not questioning that category. You didn't ask for formal evaluations. Then you're only going to select AU. You don't have to select the other areas that were suspected 6 years ago when the student established eligibility. You don't have to keep considering that every time. If it was established that he qualifies under the category of AU, you just move forward with AU, and that's the worksheet that you fill out. If a student is has had formal evaluations, and you are determining a new category, you want to select all of the different suspected areas. So let's say a student, the suspected areas might have been autism, intellectual disability, mild, maybe you consider, I don't know, like maybe deafness. Let's throw that in there too. These are the areas that you guys were considering. And then I always like to put multiple disabilities in there as well. Just in case you decide on more than one. And that's just comes from, my AU brain. Or my AU brain, my Metro brain. I want to make sure that just in case they qualify under more than one category, we have that MU option. All right, so then once you've selected those areas, you're going to see that in the assessment summary, this will be all the information that was added from those formal evaluations. So if you're doing a review of this existing data, this is all going to be previous evaluations and assessments. If you're doing new evaluations and assessments, you're going to see those populate here as well. They do need to be added. So if your SLP does a functional communication assessment, like whatever it may be, a language, a speech, whatever it is, they need to add that in here. Someone needs to add it in here. It's not just going to populate because you document or you upload it in documents. It needs to be put in here as an assessment. That's the same for everything. Once you've added all of those assessments, they're all in that assessment area, then you are going to actually link those in the summary of required screenings and evaluations. The cool thing about this page is it acts as a check for your balance. So if you ask for a qualifying category of AU, but you also ask for one for visual impairment, it's not going to let you move forward to the next page until you have linked all of the assessments that are required for that area. So keep that in mind too. This is a great thing. You're doing this ahead of the meeting just to give you that extra little cushion of making sure that you have everything uploaded. Once you've done that, you want to make sure that your vision is uploaded here, the information for that, and your hearing screening information is uploaded here. After you've done those, you're going to move on to the eligibility worksheets. So let's go to the worksheet. All right. So in the worksheets, you're going to see the areas that you've considered. So in our hypothetical, we've looked at AU and deafness for documentation of both. So we're going to start by putting the strengths and the needs in here. Fill that out per your individual student. What do we know about the student based on a review of existing information, screenings, evaluations, progress monitoring? This is an overall view of strengths and needs. Then you're going to go to the specific worksheet. So this is the AU worksheet. You're going to go through the worksheet. All the worksheets are going to look different. That's why you see the different tabs up top. Your deafness worksheet is going to look different than your AU worksheet, and you're going to fill out both of these worksheets based off of the evaluations and the information that you have. That MU worksheet, multiple disabilities is something that you'll select if you have two concurrent disabilities. So if they are deaf and also qualify under AU, that would be two or more disabilities occurring together. And this is important because what you're saying is that they are interwoven so much so that they're both very complex, they're both severe, and it's impossible to say one category is more impactful than the other. In this situation, you would be saying if they qualify under MU, that their autism category does not outweigh deafness and vice versa. So this would be a situation where a student would possibly qualify under MU. Once you've completed those worksheets, you're then going to move on to the eligibility determination. Here, you're going to start by you've reviewed all the required screenings and the evaluation information, and you've discussed the strengths and needs, and the eligibility report includes the following. So we did a review of existing data. We did look over information from assessments and other sources, and we created those eligibility worksheets. So we looked over all those things. The next button is only for SLD. So if you did a determination of SLD, you want to also click the additional information required for the determination of SLD. But in our situation, we didn't do that. So we only did those first three. Next, we move on to the disability determination. So here you can select one of two things. You can either say, this would be the student name, um, qualifies for one or more of the 14 disabling conditions described in the NC policies governing services for students with disabilities. And if that's so, you're going to select that primary disability. Now, if the student is MU, then you are going to go ahead and select MU as the primary disability. But what that implies is that both of those areas are so equal that their primary disability is in fact both. And then for a secondary disability, you would not select a secondary disability. Let's say that you guys determine as a team that autism is their primary disability, but they also are impacted by their deafness. And in which case you would say primary would be autism and your secondary would be deafness. So that is an option. Another option would be to say the student does not meet the criteria for one or more of the 14 disabling conditions described in NC policies governing services for children with disabilities. So, in that case, you've done the formal evaluations and the team has determined that he does not qualify for special education related services based off of one of the 14 disabling conditions. If you guys do make the determination that he qualifies, this is a section called adverse effects on educational performance. And these are kind of double negatives, right? So the team has also determined that the student's educational performance is not primarily caused by. So you're answering yes, these are not the primary causes. So yes, it is not due to a lack of appropriate instruction in reading, including the essential components of reading instruction. So phonemic awareness, phonics, vocabulary development, and reading fluency, and reading comprehension strategies. It is not due to a lack of appropriate instruction in math. It is not due to a limited English proficiency. It is not due to the disability having an adverse effect on educational performance. Here's what you need to think of because this usually trips people up. Sometimes they think like, oh, well, my student does have a limited English proficiency, or the disability does have an adverse effect on educational performance. What this is saying that it is not primarily caused by this. It is not primarily caused by these things. So we need additional support, right? Like this is not just a limited English proficiency. We know that they need additional supports other than just that. The next section is the education requirements section. So this is when the IEP team determines that the student requires specially designed instruction and related services. And for that, we are going to say either no, if we decided that they did not qualify, they were not eligible, or yes. And for our extensions programs kids, we are definitely going to say yes, they do require that specially designed instruction. And lastly, you're going to make that eligibility determination. So, in order to be eligible for special education related services, the student must meet the criteria for a disability in Section 1, have a disability that has an adverse effect on educational performance documented in Section 2, and require specially designed instruction and related services in Section 3. All three of those things must be in place, and if they have met all three of those eligibility criterias that are required for special education related services, then you select yes, and then you can move forward. And then you go ahead and finalize this documentation. So you're going to make sure that all this information is in place. You have your meeting participants, your dates, and you're going to draft and finalize this document. After you have finished eligibility, you need to conduct an IEP review. It does not matter if they just had an IEP done 2 months ago. It does not matter. You need to reestablish, you need to review the IEP that is required after eligibility determination. Um, I feel like I have to say it twice because a lot of times we see that a reevaluation has been done, eligibility has been done, but the IEP has not been reviewed. That is not an option. You need to do an IEP if you determine eligibility. There are some other things I want to make sure you know before we finish this out. So you're doing that IEP, and then after the IEP, you're going to do the prior written notice. Make sure that you have consent for services. So we did consent for evaluations in between. So if you're doing formal evaluations, you're going to do consent for evaluations. If you do not have consent for services, And you can check their file, make sure that you have it. If you have it, you really only have to do it once. But if you do not have it, consent for services is what gives us permission to serve these students in special education related services. So if they do not have consent for services, or if this is their initial, they're an out-of-state transfer, or if it's their first time having an IEP, you need to get consent for services. So you go to the consent tab, you go to consent for services, you draft and finalize that consent for services, and then you have that signed by the parent and uploaded into ECATS under consent. Thank you so much for participating in this review of reevaluations and eligibility processes. If you have any additional questions, please reach out to your mentor, EC chairperson, compliance facilitator, and if you still have any questions after that, you can reach out to your extensions program EC coordinating teacher. Thank you so much.